My name is Evelyn Hale. I'm 44 years old, a retired U.S. Army major. And for the better part of 2 decades, I served my country across continents most Americans couldn't locate on a map. I've led platoons under fire, signed condolence letters in the dead of night, and lived through things I won't name, not because I'm afraid, but because some truths don't belong outside the battlefield. But none of that mattered the day I sat in a California courtroom and watched my older brother stand to his feet, jab a finger in my direction, and declare for all to hear, "She's not a real veteran." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. For a breathless second, no one moved. The judge blinked. My mother looked down at her lap. Jared, my youngest brother, shifted in his seat, but said nothing. And me, I didn't flinch. Not because it didn't hurt, it did deeper than any bullet ever could, but because I'd come prepared. Without a word, I reached into the leather case at my side and pulled out a single tan folder. My heels clicked softly as I walked the polished floor toward the bench. I laid the folder down with quiet finality in front of the judge. He opened it. One page, then another. I watched the color drain from his face. His jaw tighten, his eyes harden. "No one move," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Close the doors, now." A shiver ran through the gallery. Before anyone could process what was happening, 2 officers from the military police entered the courtroom through the side doors, their uniforms' crisp expressions unreadable. One moved to the back. The other stepped toward the bench as the judge handed over the file. Behind me, Malcolm, my brother, made a noise like he wanted to stand to argue to undo the moment. But the room had already shifted. His lawyer dropped his papers. My mother's face was pale. Jared's eyes were wide. And me, I stood still. Because I wasn't there to argue anymore. I was there to end the lies. Before you hear the whole story behind that moment, if you've ever been abandoned, hurt by your own family, and still forced to smile through it, leave a comment. I'm not telling this to complain, but because, maybe somewhere, you've felt what I felt. Now, let me take you back to where it all truly began. The house sat on the edge of a cliff in Mendocino, its frame weathered by decades of salt wind and Pacific storms. It wasn't grand, just 3 bedrooms, peeling blue shutters, and a porch that creaked like it held old secrets. But it was mine. My father left it to me in his will, and for the first time in years, I had somewhere that felt like it belonged to me, even if no one else thought I deserved it. When the attorney first read the document, I could already see it in Malcolm's jaw, the tightening, the clench that always came before he decided something wasn't fair to him. My mother didn't look at me at all. And Jared, he just stared at the floor like he always did when things got uncomfortable. The will wasn't complicated. My father had split his modest estate 3 ways. Malcolm received controlling shares in Hale & Sons Hospitality, the family business he'd been managing for over a decade. Jared got a trust fund, the kind you give to someone who doesn't want to fight over anything. I received the house. That was it. And for a few weeks, it almost seemed like peace was possible. I worked on repairs by day, painted the porch railings, cleared the stubborn weeds from the garden. At night, I sat wrapped in an old quilt by the fireplace, listening to the wind hit the glass, like it always had when I was a girl. I thought maybe this time they'd let me be. But peace doesn't last long in a family that runs on control. The envelope came in early May, thick with legal weight, and just enough venom to curdle the air. Malcolm and my mother had filed a formal challenge to the will. They claimed I had manipulated our father, forged parts of my military service record, and wrongfully influenced the estate. It was written with clinical precision, each sentence another way of calling me a fraud. I read it 3 times, sitting at the kitchen table where my father used to map out his road trips. My name, Evelyn Hale, appeared again and again, not as a daughter or soldier, but as a liar. They weren't just challenging the inheritance. They were erasing who I had been for 20 years. There was no phone call, no family meeting, just a summons and a deadline. 30 days to respond. I called Jared once. He didn't answer. I didn't try again. So I did what the Army taught me to do when the ground starts to shift beneath your feet. I gathered my gear. Not weapons, not armor, documents, photos, service evaluations, deployment rosters, letters from the field, proof of a life lived in uniform. And I started preparing for a new kind of war, the kind that comes not from enemies across a border, but from the people who once shared your last name. The kind of war you fight alone. Malcolm was born with a silver spoon and a roadmap. From the time we were kids, it was clear he was being groomed to inherit everything: our father's business, his confidence, his pride. He was sharp, clean-cut, always knew when to smile and when to ask for more. People loved him. My mother worshipped him. Me, I was the one who asked too many questions. They didn't know what to do with me. I didn't care about branding strategies or 5-year projections. While Malcolm sat in boardrooms with our father, learning how to read financial statements, I was in the backyard with Jared building makeshift tents and drawing world maps in chalk on the patio. And even back then, I knew I was an outsider in my own house. It wasn't that I hated them, it was that I never belonged. My mother, Carolyn, was all elegance and expectations. Every movement rehearsed, every word filtered for image. She believed loyalty to the family meant obedience. But I didn't fit the mold. I didn't want to wear pearls or learn about hospitality management. I wanted to serve. I wanted to matter. When I enlisted at 18, the argument could have shattered glass. My mother cried like I'd died. Malcolm laughed. Jared avoided my eyes and disappeared behind his bedroom door. My father stood in the corner, quiet, unreadable. And when I walked out that night, duffel over my shoulder, no one followed me. Years passed. Combat changes you. Command humbles you. Loss burns away what's unnecessary. I came back with scars, some I could show, some I couldn't. I didn't return to win applause. I came back to be part of something simple: family. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd look at me differently, that they'd see the weight I carried and respect it. But the silence at dinner told me otherwise. Malcolm changed the subject every time my service came up. My mother glanced out windows, as if she couldn't bear to hear where I'd been. Jared stayed mute, sipping wine, shrinking further into his shadow. No one asked what I'd seen, what I'd survived. I became background noise at my own homecoming, so when the lawsuit arrived, it wasn't just betrayal, it was confirmation. They hadn't misunderstood me. They had never accepted me. What struck me most wasn't their greed. It was their cruelty. The willingness to strip away 2 decades of service and sacrifice for the sake of one old house and the memory of a man they only pretended to revere. That night, I sat outside on the porch, boots planted against the floorboards my father once repaired by hand. The wind came off the sea, colder than I remembered. I didn't cry. I didn't curse them. I made a decision. They wanted a fight. They'd get one, but not on their terms, on mine. War teaches you that emotion is a luxury. Rage, grief, fear. None of it helps when the bullets start flying. What saves you is preparation, control, the discipline to keep breathing when everything else wants to shut down. So I did what I'd always done when the world turned hostile. I got to work. I contacted the Department of Defense and requested my full service record. I called in favors from former commanders and unit leaders. I spent hours cross-checking every deployment, every medal, every injury report. My shoulder still flared with pain, sometimes a reminder of the shrapnel I'd carried home from Kandahar. But paper would speak louder than pain in court. I didn't just want to defend myself. I wanted to be undeniable. Still, the gaps unnerved me. A few files had been tampered with, digital inconsistencies, misdated entries. Enough to raise questions, but not enough to confirm foul play outright. Whoever had doctored the records knew what they were doing. It wasn't sloppy. It was surgical, precise. Which meant someone close to me had done it. I was staring at my laptop late one night, the glow of the screen painting the walls in pale blue, when a message appeared on my phone. 5 words. No sender ID. We need to talk. Alone. My heart stuttered. It was Jared. We met the next night at the edge of the cliffs near the house, where the sea slammed into the rocks like it was trying to remember something. He stood with his hands shoved in his coat pockets, head down, eyes avoiding mine. He looked thinner, older, like guilt had been chewing at him from the inside out. I didn't know how far they'd go, he said, voice barely above the wind. I didn't reply, just waited. After a moment, he pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and held it out. You should see this. Back home, I plugged it in with shaking fingers. What I found nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. Emails between Malcolm and my mother, dozens of them. Discussions about altering the will, funneling charitable donations through false accounts under my name. communications with a private tech firm hired to quietly edit military databases, drafts of press releases months old ready to discredit me the moment the lawsuit hit. They had built the perfect narrative. Evelyn Hale, the imposter soldier, the manipulator, the embarrassment, and they had expected me to fold. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the table where my father once read the morning paper and drafted a plan of my own. Precise, patient, quiet. They thought they knew me, that I'd break, that I'd vanish like I always had. But they had underestimated what 2 decades of service had taught me. You don't go into battle hoping for mercy, you go in ready to win. The day of the hearing, the air in the courthouse felt artificially cold, like the kind pumped into sealed bunkers before something explosive happens. I wore a navy blue suit, not my uniform. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of thinking I was hiding behind insignias. No medals, no ribbons, just me. Evelyn Hale, the woman they were trying to erase. The courtroom was packed. Reporters in the back, murmurs from the gallery. Malcolm sat at the plaintiff's table, perfectly groomed his lips, twitching into that smug half-smile he'd perfected in business school. My mother sat beside him, spine rigid pearls tight against her throat. She didn't glance my way. Jared was 1 row behind them, silent, as always, his hands folded too neatly in his lap. The judge called us to order. Opening statements began. Malcolm's lawyer spoke like he was reading from a screenplay. Concerned older brother worried mother questions about inconsistencies in my record, strange behavior, manipulation of a dying father. They'd rehearsed it all, even the inflection in their voices. It wasn't just an attack, it was a performance, and I was supposed to be the villain. When Malcolm stood, he told the court that I had abandoned the family, only reappearing when there was property involved. That I'd used my military service, if any of it were even real, as leverage to gain sympathy from our father. And then, as if he were spitting venom through a silk tie, he looked at the judge and said, "She's not a real veteran." No one gasped. But the silence that followed was louder than any outcry. I kept my eyes forward. I didn't blink. My attorney rose calmly, unfazed. She walked the court through my service record, verified, notarized, and signed by senior officers. She presented photos, official citations letters from my commanding officers. She didn't raise her voice once. And then came my turn. I didn't speak. Instead, I reached into my briefcase and withdrew the tan folder Jared had given me, the one that contained the truth sharp enough to cut through every lie. I walked it forward and placed it in front of the judge. No speech, no explanation, just a glance. The judge opened the folder and read the first page. His brow furrowed. He flipped another. His shoulders stiffened. "No one move," he said sharply. "Close the doors, now." Before anyone could react, the courtroom door swung shut. 2 officers from the military police stepped in. Calm, focused, trained. Malcolm's face blanched. His lawyer dropped a pen. My mother gripped the edge of her chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. And Jared didn't move at all. But his eyes met mine for the first time. The military police moved like they'd done this before, crisp, efficient, unemotional. 1 officer took position by the door. The other approached the bench and quietly received instructions from the judge. A second bailiff locked the courtroom behind them. No one was leaving. The judge didn't speak right away. He just kept reading. And page by page, the narrative they'd spent months crafting unraveled in front of them. The financial records came first, donations to veteran charities that never made it past shell accounts registered to Malcolm and my mother. Hundreds of thousands redirected under my name. Donations tied to causes I never even knew existed. Their fraud wore my face. Then came the emails, long threads between the 2 of them, planning every step. Timing the media smear, creating a backstory that would paint me as unstable, opportunistic, and untrustworthy. They had rehearsed my downfall like it was a business acquisition. And finally, the forged amendments to the will, drafted weeks before our father died, signed not by his longtime attorney, but by someone on Malcolm's payroll. The handwriting didn't match. The ink hadn't aged. The evidence was damning, and worse, it was deliberate. The judge finally looked up, his voice no longer calm. "This court is now in possession of evidence that suggests federal crimes have been committed, including fraud, forgery, and obstruction related to military service and estate handling. The civil case is suspended immediately pending criminal investigation. I didn't turn to look at Malcolm. I didn't need to. I could feel him unraveling behind me. My mother sat still, her expression-fractured mouth parted, but empty of words. Jared remained seated in the gallery, his hands folded the same way they'd been all morning. But his shoulders, they had settled. He had done the hardest thing of all. He had chosen the truth. As the judge handed the folder to the officers, the weight of everything I had carried for years finally left my body not as a roar, not as triumph, but as silence. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. Not because I had won, but because I had finally been seen. Malcolm didn't speak, not right away. He sat there blinking like the lights had suddenly become too bright. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something urgent, but Malcolm didn't seem to hear it. His jaw clenched, his fists balled, but there was no power left in his performance. The mask had cracked. My mother still hadn't moved. She stared forward, frozen, her hands tight in her lap. I watched her face searching for something: remorse, confusion, even fury, but all I saw was vacancy. The kind that settles in when a carefully controlled narrative comes undone. The judge ordered a recess to allow for immediate review by federal prosecutors. The military police remained inside, silent, stationed at either exit. When the gavel struck, the sound echoed like a final nail being driven into the lid of something long rotting. I stepped into the hallway alone. The noise of the courthouse returned slowly. Heels on tile, the whir of cameras outside, murmurs from reporters gathering near the doors. I leaned against the wall and let out the breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My knees trembled not from fear, but from release. The weight of what I had carried was beginning to leave me. And then I heard footsteps. I turned and saw Jared. His eyes were red, his face pale, but he was walking toward me, not hiding, not slinking away, but upright, steady. When he reached me, he stopped just short of speaking. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I shook my head. "You don't have to be." He looked down, swallowing hard. "I should have done it sooner. I let them." "You did it when it mattered." He nodded once, just once, but it carried years. Behind the courtroom doors, I imagined Malcolm pacing, scrambling, trying to find a version of this story where he still came out clean. I imagined my mother still sitting perfectly upright, too proud to cry, and too ashamed to move. Let them sit in it. Let them feel the silence they once used as a weapon. They had waged war on my name, my memory, my honor. But they forgot one thing. I was trained for battle. And this one, I had already won. I didn't walk out of that courthouse with a trophy. There was no applause, no victory parade, just a quiet sky over Mendocino and the sound of gravel beneath my boots as I made my way back to the house on the cliff. I didn't need headlines. I didn't need vindication. I had the truth. The investigation into Malcolm and my mother moved swiftly. Charges were filed. Their names, once polished and praised in town, began to fall from guest lists and boardrooms. Jared stayed quiet in the press, but came by the house sometimes. We didn't talk about the case anymore. We didn't have to. I planted lavender that spring, tore out the weeds, repaired the old porch swing with my own hands. Some nights I'd sit outside, coffee in hand, wrapped in silence, not forced upon me, but chosen. Not all wars leave scars you can see. Some just leave space, room to breathe again. And sometimes that's enough. Because I'm still here, still standing. And finally I'm free.